The marble floors of Sterling Trust Bank gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. I stood in line, dressed casually in jeans and a simple gray hoodie, my worn sneakers squeaking slightly against the polished surface. It was Tuesday, around 2 in the afternoon, and I had just 15 minutes before my next meeting. I needed to handle a quick transaction, nothing complicated, just a routine deposit that should have taken 5 minutes maximum. The woman in front of me, however, had other plans. Her name was Patricia Henderson, though I wouldn't learn that detail until much later. She wore a designer pantsuit, the kind that screamed expensive without whispering elegance, and her perfectly manicured nails drummed impatiently against the counter. Her blonde hair was styled in that particular way that suggested she had spent more time at the salon that morning than most people spend at work all day. Everything about her posture, her expression, her very presence radiated entitlement. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Patricia's voice cut through the quiet hum of the bank like a knife. The young teller, whose name tag read Marcus Chen, was visibly sweating despite the air conditioning. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to explain something to her, but she wasn't listening. She never intended to listen. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but our policy clearly states," Marcus began, his voice professional but strained. "I don't care about your policy." Patricia slammed her hand on the counter and several other customers turned to look. "Do you know who I am? My husband is Bradley Henderson, the Bradley Henderson. We have accounts worth more than your annual salary at this pathetic excuse for a financial institution. Now, I want this fee reversed immediately, and I want to speak to your manager. Actually, no, I want to speak to whoever owns this place because clearly the standards here have dropped to an embarrassing level." I watched this unfold with a mixture of amusement and growing concern. Marcus was handling it well, all things considered, but I could see the toll it was taking. His professionalism was a shield, but shields can crack under enough pressure. I glanced at my watch. My meeting could wait. This, I decided, was more important. Patricia continued her tirade, her voice growing louder with each passing second. "And another thing, this bank used to have class. Now look at it. You're letting just anyone walk in here." She gestured vaguely around the lobby, and I realized with a sinking feeling that she was about to make this situation even worse. "Look at that person behind me, dressed like they just rolled out of a homeless shelter. This is supposed to be a premium banking institution, not a charity. When I'm done with my complaint, you need to ask them to leave. They're probably here to ask for a loan they'll never pay back or to open some pathetic account with $50. The entire bank went silent. Even the soft muzak playing over the speakers seemed to fade into nothingness. Marcus's eyes widened, and he looked past Patricia to me, his expression a mixture of horror and apology. Several other employees had emerged from their offices, drawn by the commotion, and they too were staring, not at Patricia, but at me. I felt a familiar weight settle in my chest, that particular combination of disappointment and resignation that comes from being judged by appearance alone. But beneath that, something else stirred, something I had learned to control over the years. Patricia had no idea who she was talking about, none whatsoever. And in that moment, I made a decision. I would let this play out. Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way, and Patricia Henderson was about to enroll in a master class. "Miss Henderson," Marcus tried again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps we should discuss this in a private office. I will not be shuffled into some back room like my concerns don't matter." Patricia's face was flushed now, her carefully applied makeup beginning to crack around the edges. "You will reverse this fee right now, and you will remove that person from the premises. I shouldn't have to share this space with people who clearly don't belong here. This is a bank for successful people, for people who matter, not for—" She waved her hand dismissively in my direction again, whatever that is. The other customers were openly staring now, some with shock, others with anger. An elderly gentleman near the window shook his head in disgust. A young mother clutched her daughter's hand a little tighter as if trying to shield her from the ugliness of the moment. But nobody said anything. Nobody stepped forward. They all just watched, waiting to see how this would unfold. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the counter, positioning myself just behind Patricia. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice calm and measured. I couldn't help but overhear. "I couldn't help but overhear. Is there a problem?" Patricia spun around, her eyes narrowing as she looked me up and down with undisguised contempt. "Is there a problem?" Yes, there's a problem. The problem is that this bank has forgotten what standards are. The problem is that people like you think you can just walk into places like this and demand service like you're somebody important. The problem is that I'm being forced to wait in line behind people who probably can't even afford the minimum balance requirement. She turned back to Marcus, her voice dripping with venom. Close whatever account this person has. They can take their business elsewhere. I'm a platinum member, and I refuse to bank anywhere that allows such riffraff through the doors. Consider this an ultimatum. Either they go, or I take my 7-figure accounts to Chase. Marcus looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. The other employees, however, had gone pale. One of them, a woman in her 50s named Dorothy, whom I recognized, had her hand over her mouth. Another, a young man named James from the mortgage department, was frantically trying to get Patricia's attention, waving his hands in a stop motion, but she was too focused on her righteous fury to notice. This, I realized, was the moment, the point of no return. Patricia Henderson had made her choice, thrown down her gauntlet, and now the universe would respond. I felt almost sorry for her. Almost. 23 years ago, I was exactly where Marcus was standing now. Not physically, of course, but metaphorically. I was young, fresh out of college with a business degree and dreams bigger than my bank account, which at the time held exactly $347. I had applied to Sterling Trust Bank for an entry-level teller position, the same job Marcus held now, and I had been rejected 3 times before they finally gave me a chance. My name is Jordan Taylor, though back then most people just called me Kid, or the New One. I worked 12-hour days, studied every manual, learned every regulation, and absorbed everything I could about banking, finance, and most importantly, about people. Because banking, I learned very quickly, isn't really about money. It's about trust, relationships, and understanding that every person who walks through those doors has a story, a dream, a life that extends far beyond the numbers in their account. I remembered a day, about 20 years ago, when an elderly woman came in needing to cash a small check. She was dressed in clothes that had seen better decades, and she smelled faintly of mothballs and desperation. The teller at the time, a man named Richard who thought his business degree made him superior to everyone, had been openly rude to her, suggesting she might be more comfortable at a less prestigious institution. I was only a senior teller then, not yet a manager, but I had stepped in. I had cashed her check, helped her open a small savings account, and spent an extra 20 minutes just talking to her about her grandson who was in medical school. That woman, Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, never forgot that kindness. 2 years later, when her husband passed away and left her a substantial estate, she moved every penny of it to Sterling Trust Bank. She told the then manager in no uncertain terms that it was because of that young person, Jordan, who treated me like I mattered. That deposit, that relationship had been the foundation of my rise through the ranks. But the journey hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks, betrayals, moments where I questioned everything. I remembered the financial crisis of 2008, watching as titans of industry crumbled and banks collapsed. Sterling Trust had been on the brink, and I, then a vice president, had made a decision that many called reckless. I had used my own savings, every penny I had, along with investments from people who believed in my vision, to buy a controlling stake in the bank. Not because I wanted power, but because I couldn't stand watching an institution that had given me a chance die a slow, humiliating death. The board had laughed at me. "You're 32 years old," one member had sneered. "What do you know about running a bank?" But I had known something they didn't. I knew that banking wasn't about quarterly reports and shareholder dividends. It was about communities, about giving people chances, about understanding that sometimes the person in worn sneakers and a hoodie might be the one who changes everything. It took 5 years of brutal work, of 18-hour days and missed birthdays and relationships that crumbled under the weight of my obsession. But I turned Sterling Trust around. We became profitable again, but more than that, we became different. We implemented programs for low-income families, offered second-chance accounts for people rebuilding their credit, and trained our staff to see people, not just accounts. We still maintained our high-end services, still catered to wealthy clients, but we did it with the understanding that wealth doesn't equal worth. By the time I was 40, I owned Sterling Trust Bank outright, not just a controlling stake, but everything. Every branch, every employee, every decision flowed through me, but I had never let it change who I was. I still wore jeans on my days off, still ate lunch at food trucks, still remembered what it felt like to count pennies and hope the gas tank would last until payday. And I had implemented one inflexible rule across all branches. Every customer, regardless of account size, dress, or perceived status, would be treated with dignity and respect. Employees who couldn't follow that rule didn't stay employees for long. I had fired vice presidents and managers for behavior far less egregious than what Patricia Henderson was currently displaying. But I also believed in letting people reveal themselves fully before passing judgment. It's easy to catch someone on a bad day, at a moment of frustration where they say something they don't mean. What I was witnessing with Patricia, however, went beyond a bad day. This was character. This was who she was at her core, and she was revealing it beautifully, painting a portrait of entitlement and cruelty that would have been almost artistic if it weren't so ugly. Dorothy, my head of customer relations, was trying desperately to catch my eye now. She knew. She had worked with me for 18 years, had been there for the buyout, the restructuring, everything. She recognized what was about to happen, and I could see her mentally calculating how to handle the aftermath. James from Mortgages had given up trying to warn Patricia and was instead recording everything on his phone, probably for the inevitable HR documentation we would need. I looked back at Patricia, who was still berating Marcus, her voice echoing through the lobby like nails on a chalkboard. She had no idea that she was standing in a building that I owned, in a space that existed because I had poured my soul into saving it, making demands of an employee I had personally hired and trained. The irony was so perfect it was almost painful. But the real tragedy was this. If she had just been patient, just been kind, just treated Marcus and me with basic human decency, none of what was about to happen would have happened. She could have had her fee reversed, could have left with her dignity intact, could have continued her day without incident. Instead, she had chosen this path, and I, despite my better angels, was going to let her walk it to the very end. Because some lessons can only be learned through experience, and Patricia Henderson's education was about to begin. "Ma'am," Marcus tried one more time, his voice cracking slightly. "I really think we should step into a private office to discuss." "I've already told you I'm not going anywhere until this situation is resolved." Patricia's voice had reached a pitch that was making people wince. "I want this fee reversed, I want that person removed from the bank, and I want assurance that this institution will maintain proper standards going forward. If I don't get all three of those things in the next 5 minutes, I'm not only closing all my accounts, I'm calling my attorney and filing a complaint with every regulatory agency I can find. Do you understand me?" I watched Marcus's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Fear, frustration, resignation, and finally, a kind of grim determination. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a question. I gave him the slightest nod. Permission, authorization, go ahead. "Miss Henderson," Marcus said, his voice suddenly steadier, "I cannot reverse the fee because it was properly applied according to the account terms you agreed to when you opened your account. I cannot ask that customer to leave because they have done nothing wrong and have every right to be here, and I cannot assure you that this institution will change its standards because our standards are exactly what they should be. Treating every human being who walks through those doors with respect and dignity." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Excuse me? Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I will have your job for this. I will personally ensure you never work in banking again. You'll what, exactly?" The voice came from behind her, smooth and authoritative. Dorothy had stepped forward, her 62 years of life experience radiating from her like heat. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile a shark might give before dinner. "Miss Henderson, I'm Dorothy Williams, head of customer relations here at Sterling Trust. I've been listening to this entire conversation, and I think we need to clarify a few things." Patricia whirled on Dorothy, apparently believing she had found an ally. "Finally, someone with actual authority. This teller has been incredibly rude, refusing to help me, and I've been forced to stand here next to someone who clearly doesn't belong in this establishment. You want to close your accounts and leave?" Dorothy interrupted, her smile never wavering. "That can certainly be arranged. However, before we process that, I need to address your concerns about our other customer." "They're not a concern, they're a problem," Patricia snapped. "This is supposed to be a premier financial institution. You can't just let anyone walk in off the street." Dorothy's smile grew wider, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Miss Henderson, you're absolutely right. We can't just let anyone work here or make important decisions. That's why we have very strict standards. For instance, our owner has very particular requirements about how staff treat customers." "Good. Then you understand my point. That person, Dorothy continued, her voice cutting through Patricia's words like butter, "is standing right behind you, and you've been demanding that they close their account and leave their own bank. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute, that I could hear the hum of the air conditioning system 3 floors up. Patricia's face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, disbelief, understanding, and finally, a kind of pale horror that would have been funny if the situation weren't so sad. "What?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper now. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. "Hello, Miss Henderson. My name is Jordan Taylor. I've owned Sterling Trust Bank for the past 15 years. Every branch, every policy, every employee, including Marcus here, ultimately answers to me." I kept my voice gentle, almost kind, because anger would have been too easy. "You've had quite a lot to say about who belongs in this bank and who doesn't. You've made demands about closing accounts and removing customers you deemed unworthy. So let's talk about that." Patricia's face had gone from pale to absolutely white. Her perfectly applied makeup stood out in stark contrast to her bloodless skin. I didn't... You can't possibly... "Be the owner?" I finished for her. "Why not? Because I'm dressed casually? Because I was standing in line like everyone else? Because I don't feel the need to announce my status and demand special treatment?" I paused, letting that sink in. "You made assumptions based on appearance, and those assumptions were wrong. But that's not even the real problem here, is it?" The other customers had formed a semicircle now, watching this unfold like it was the most compelling drama they had ever witnessed. Some had their phones out, recording. I didn't stop them. This was a teaching moment, not just for Patricia, but for everyone present. "The real problem," I continued, "is that you treated another human being with contempt and cruelty because you believed they were beneath you. You demanded that Marcus, who is an excellent employee, violate our policies and his own integrity to serve your ego. You attempted to use your wealth as a weapon, as if money gives you the right to diminish others." I looked directly into her eyes. "That's the problem, Miss Henderson. Not a clothing choice, not a line position, but a fundamental failure of character." Patricia's hands were shaking now. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The designer bag on her arm suddenly looked less like an accessory and more like a shield she wished she could hide behind. "However," I said, and something in my tone made everyone lean forward slightly, "I believe in giving people chances to do better. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a choice to make, and that choice is going to determine what happens next. But first, I think you need to understand exactly what you almost destroyed today." I gestured to Marcus. "Tell her about your mother, Marcus." Marcus looked surprised, then understanding dawned. His voice was quiet but steady. "My mother has dementia. I work here to pay for her care facility because insurance doesn't cover everything. This job, this specific branch, allows me to visit her during my lunch break. If I lost this position because of your complaint, I would have had to move her to a state facility 3 hours away." His eyes met Patricia's. "That's what you almost did with your tantrum over a $15 fee." The weight of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Patricia Henderson stood frozen, her perfectly manicured fingers clutching her designer bag like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned liquid beneath her feet. The color had drained from her face completely now, leaving her looking almost ghostly under the bank's fluorescent lighting. Around us, the crowd of customers and employees waited in breathless silence, every eye locked on this moment of reckoning. I didn't know," Patricia whispered, and for the first time since this confrontation began, her voice carried something other than arrogance. It carried the first trembling notes of genuine fear. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," I replied, keeping my tone level but firm. "You saw someone you perceived as lesser and decided their humanity wasn't worth considering. But here's the thing about assumptions, Miss Henderson. They reveal far more about the person making them than the person they're made about." I could see her mind racing, calculating, trying to find a way out of this disaster of her own making. The business part of her brain was probably screaming at her to apologize, to grovel, to do whatever it took to salvage the situation. But I could also see pride warring with pragmatism, entitlement fighting with self-preservation. "Now," I continued, "let's address your accounts. You mentioned they're worth 7 figures. According to our records, you and your husband Bradley have 3 accounts with us. A joint checking account with approximately $43,000, a savings account with $96,000, and a money market account with roughly $218,000. Substantial, certainly, but you should know that we handle accounts worth considerably more, and we treat them all with the same respect." Patricia's eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to know the exact figures. The mention of specific numbers made this real in a way that generalities couldn't. "The fee you're so upset about," I went on, "is a $15 charge for requesting a stop payment on a check. It's a standard fee, clearly outlined in the account agreement you signed. Marcus was following policy correctly. But you weren't really angry about the fee, were you? You were angry because you were told no, and people like you aren't accustomed to that word." "Miss Taylor," Patricia started, but I held up a hand. "Jordan," I corrected, "and I'm not finished. You demanded that I close my own account and leave my own bank. You insisted that Marcus remove me from the premises because my clothing didn't meet your personal standards of appropriateness. You used your wealth as a threat, attempting to bully an employee into submission. And most damningly, you did all of this publicly, loudly, and with absolute confidence that you were right." I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "So here's your choice, Patricia. Yes, I'm using your first name now because we're past formalities. You can leave this bank right now with your dignity relatively intact. We'll close your accounts, you'll take your business elsewhere, and we'll part ways. No lawsuit, no complaints to regulators, no drama beyond what's already occurred. You walk out, and this story ends here." Hope flickered in Patricia's eyes. She started to nod, ready to take the escape hatch I was offering. "Or," I continued, and the hope died instantly, "you can stay. But if you stay, it comes with conditions. First, you will apologize to Marcus, genuinely and publicly, acknowledging what you tried to do to him. Second, you will donate $5,000 to the Alzheimer's Association in honor of Marcus's mother. Third, you will attend a 4-hour course on empathy and customer service that we offer to our employees, because if it's good enough for my staff, it's good enough for my customers. And fourth, you will write a letter to be posted in this branch and on our website explaining what you learned from this experience." The lobby was so quiet I could hear someone's stomach growl 3 people away. Patricia looked like I had just asked her to walk across hot coals while juggling chainsaws. "Those are your options," I said. "Leave quietly or stay and do better. The choice is entirely yours, and I won't judge you for either decision. But I need you to understand something crucial. This bank exists to serve everyone, not just people who meet some arbitrary standard of acceptability. We don't care if you're a millionaire in Prada or a college student in thrift store jeans. We care about treating people with respect, and we expect our customers to do the same." Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times. She looked at Marcus, then at me, then at the crowd of people watching her every move. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the weighing of pride against pragmatism, ego against embarrassment. "What if I refuse both options?" she asked, her voice small and desperate. Dorothy stepped forward again, her smile gone now, replaced by professional steel. "Then we close your accounts anyway, flag you in our system as someone who violated our code of conduct, and you'll find that most banks in this area have information sharing agreements. Word travels fast in the financial sector, Miss Henderson, especially when it involves wealthy customers who abuse service workers." It was a bluff mostly. We couldn't actually blacklist someone from other banks, but Patricia didn't know that, and the threat hung in the air like a sword. I watched Patricia Henderson in that moment, truly watched her, and saw something I hadn't expected. Behind the designer clothes and the arrogance and the cruelty, I saw something familiar. I saw someone who had learned that money could insulate her from consequences, that status could be wielded like a weapon, that the world would bend to her will if she simply demanded loudly enough. And now, perhaps for the first time in years, she was discovering that none of it was true. Patricia's voice cracked. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, something had shifted. "I'll stay. I'll do what you asked." The crowd released a collective breath they didn't know they'd been holding. "Are you sure?" I asked gently. "There's no shame in choosing to leave." "I'm sure," Patricia said, and this time her voice was steady. "Because you're right. About all of it. And I need to be better than this." Patricia Henderson turned to face Marcus, and in that moment, I saw her armor crack completely. Her shoulders, which had been rigid with indignation just minutes before, slumped slightly. Her hands, which had been gesturing so aggressively, now hung at her sides, uncertain and vulnerable. The transformation was remarkable, like watching ice melt in real time, revealing the water beneath. "Marcus," she began, and her voice trembled. "I am so deeply sorry." The words came out rough, unpracticed, as if she hadn't apologized sincerely in years. I had no right to speak to you the way I did. No right to threaten your job, to diminish your professionalism, or to treat you as anything less than a human being doing his job correctly. She paused, swallowing hard. Your mother is lucky to have a son who cares so much. I lost my own mother 5 years ago. She had dementia too, at the end. This last detail surprised everyone, including me. Patricia's eyes were glistening now, tears threatening to spill over her carefully applied makeup. Marcus stood behind the counter, his expression cycling through shock, uncertainty, and finally something that looked like compassion. Thank you for saying that, Miss Henderson. I accept your apology. It's Patricia, she said softly. Just Patricia. And thank you for being gracious enough to accept it. I don't deserve your kindness. I watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because growth was happening in real time. Sadness because it had taken such a dramatic confrontation to spark it. How many other times had Patricia treated service workers this way, at restaurants, at retail stores, at hotels? How many Marcus As had she left in her wake, carrying the wounds of her words? The donation, Patricia said, turning back to me. I'd like to make it 10,000 instead of 5, and I want it to go specifically to research for early onset dementia. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking slightly as she navigated to her banking app. Can I do it right now? Through the mobile app? Yes, I replied, but let's move to a private office. This doesn't need to be a public spectacle. I gestured toward one of the glass-walled consultation rooms off the main lobby. Dorothy, Marcus, Patricia, and I moved into the space, and I closed the door behind us, muffling the whispers and murmurs from the crowd outside. Once seated, Patricia completed the donation transaction, showing me the confirmation screen with a kind of desperate need for validation. I nodded approvingly. That's very generous. The Alzheimer's Association will put it to good use. Now, Dorothy said, pulling up a calendar on her tablet, let's schedule your empathy training course. We offer it twice a month, typically on Saturday mornings. It's taught by Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychologist who specializes in interpersonal dynamics and emotional intelligence. Patricia nodded, accepting a date 3 weeks out. I'll be there, I promise. The letter, I said gently. That's going to be the hardest part. Not because writing it is difficult, but because facing your actions in written form, knowing others will read it, requires real courage. You don't have to do it today. Take a week. Think about what you want to say, what you've learned. Patricia looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you give me a choice? You could have just kicked me out, banned me, made me the villain of some viral video. Lord knows I deserved it. Why offer me a chance to do better? I leaned back in my chair, considering my answer carefully. Because 15 years ago, I almost became you. I had money for the first time in my life, real money, and I felt the temptation to let it change me. To start seeing people as transactions, as inconveniences, as obstacles to what I wanted. I paused, remembering. Someone gave me a chance to see what I was becoming before it was too late. An elderly janitor at our headquarters, a man named Thomas, called me out in the middle of a board meeting. He said, "You're becoming the kind of person who forgets that everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about." It was humiliating and necessary. Patricia's eyes were fully streaming now, tears cutting tracks through her foundation. I've become someone I don't recognize. Bradley, my husband, he travels constantly for work. I spend my days at the country club, shopping, having lunch with women who are just like me, and we've created this bubble where we convince ourselves that our problems matter more than everyone else's, that our time is more valuable, our frustrations more legitimate. She laughed bitterly. I didn't even need to be at the bank today. I could have handled that stop payment online. But I came here because I was bored and wanted to feel important by pushing someone around. How sick is that? Marcus, who had been silent until now, spoke up. It takes strength to admit that. More strength than most people have. Or maybe just desperation, Patricia replied. I don't want to be that person anymore. The person my children will be embarrassed to bring their friends around. The person waiters dread seeing walk through the door. She looked at each of us in turn. Will you help me? Not just with the class and the letter, but will you help me learn how to be better? I exchanged glances with Dorothy, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, I said. We'll help. But Patricia, you need to understand something. This isn't going to be easy or quick. Real change takes time, effort, and a willingness to feel uncomfortable. You're going to have moments where you slip back into old patterns, where entitlement feels easier than empathy. When that happens, you have to choose consciously to do better. I will, Patricia said with a conviction that surprised me. I promise I will. We talked for another 30 minutes, working out details, exchanging contact information, discussing what her journey might look like. When we finally emerged from the office, the crowd in the lobby had mostly dispersed, though a few lingering customers nodded approvingly at Patricia as she passed. She paused at Marcus's station one more time. "Thank you," she said simply, "for your professionalism and your grace. I hope your mother has many good days ahead." Marcus smiled, genuine and warm. "Thank you, Patricia. I hope the same for you." 3 months later, I sat in my actual office, the one on the top floor with the view of the city skyline, reviewing quarterly reports when Dorothy knocked on my door. She held a manila envelope and wore an expression I couldn't quite read, something between satisfaction and emotion. "You need to see this," she said, handing me the envelope. Inside was Patricia Henderson's letter, the one we had asked her to write. But this wasn't a short, perfunctory apology. This was 10 pages, handwritten in elegant script, detailing her journey over the past 3 months. I began to read, and with each paragraph I felt something tighten in my chest. To anyone who reads this, my name is Patricia Henderson, and 3 months ago I was the worst version of myself in the lobby of Sterling Trust Bank. I berated a teller for doing his job correctly, demanded special treatment I didn't deserve, and attempted to have someone removed from the bank because their clothing didn't meet my arbitrary standards. That someone turned out to be Jordan Taylor, the bank's owner, but that detail, while ironic, isn't the most important part of this story. The important part is that I had become a person who measured worth by appearance and bank account size, a person who treated service workers as obstacles rather than humans, a person who believed that money gave me the right to make others feel small so I could feel big. In the 3 months since that day, I have attended Dr. Chen's empathy course, not once, but 3 times, because I wanted to be sure the lessons stuck. I have volunteered at 3 different organizations, a homeless shelter, a food bank, and a senior care facility. I have had conversations with people whose stories broke my heart and rebuilt my understanding of what truly matters. I have learned that the single mother working 2 jobs and still finding time to smile at her children is worth infinitely more than my designer handbag. I have learned that the elderly man counting change at the grocery store has a lifetime of experiences that make my complaints about a $15 fee look obscene. I have learned that privilege isn't just about what you have, it's about what you do with what you have. Marcus Chen, the teller I tried to have fired, taught me more about grace in 5 minutes than I learned in 42 years of life. When I apologized to him, he said, "Thank you for being gracious enough to accept it." Think about that. I had verbally assaulted this man, threatened his livelihood, and he thanked me for accepting his kindness and forgiving me. Jordan Taylor taught me that true power isn't about making others bend to your will, it's about lifting others up. They could have destroyed me that day, could have made me a viral video cautionary tale, could have taken pleasure in my humiliation. Instead, they offered me something more valuable than money, a chance to become better. This experience has changed me fundamentally. My husband Bradley says I'm a different person, and he's right. I listen more, talk less, I tip better, apologize more readily, and check my assumptions constantly. I look at every person I encounter and remind myself that I know nothing about their struggles, their stories, their worth. To anyone reading this who has ever treated a service worker poorly, who has ever used their status as a weapon, who has ever made someone feel less than human because it made them feel more important, I'm telling you this as someone who was there, it's not worth it. The temporary satisfaction of throwing your weight around is nothing compared to the permanent shame of recognizing what you've become. To Marcus, I hope